And welcome back to Collab Farm. I'm your host, Jackson Roulette, and I'm going to be real honest with you. I've been working hard lately. If you're listening to this, I bet you have been working hard too. Case in point, I just got our garlic into the ground down here in Zone 7, but better late than never, I suppose. So I thought I'd seize this opportunity to bring back an old episode, the very first episode of the Collaborative Farming Podcast, actually. A conversation I had with Chris Bodnar of Close to Home Organics and the Glen Valley Farm. This one comes to mind as one of the best Collab Farm episodes ever, and now that we're reaching a wider audience, I wanted to give it the opportunity to reach more listeners. Chris is not only a stellar farmer and part of a cooperative farm framework, he's extremely well versed in the history of modern farm cooperatives. Now that most of my personal garden projects are winding down for the season as we move into winter harvest mode, even though it's not looking like we're going to get a frost until December, which is strange. Not sure how I feel about that, but we'll be back in 2 weeks with some great guests that know way more about what it means to farm together than I do, and some really, really great conversations. But until then and thereafter, I guess, remember that many hands make light work, and let's hear from some of those show sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Grow Organic. In our no-till community, we understand that quality growing supplies and selection make all the difference. As the nation's largest independent retailer dedicated to regenerative and sustainable agriculture, Peace Valley Farm and Garden Supply is your one-stop shop offering 5,000 reliable products, including cover crops, soil amendments, tools, and more. Serving market farmers since 1976, it's before I was born, they understand the needs of growers, both big and small. Save 20% on your first order now with code NOTIL24, that's NOTIL24. Apply for a commercial account for year-round savings and dedicated support. Visit groworganic.com/notill or use the link down in the description to get started today. This episode is also brought to you by ASAP, the Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project. The Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project, ASAP, will offer the Business of Farming Conference on Saturday, February 22nd in the beautiful Asheville, North Carolina. This annual conference brings together professional and aspiring farmers from across the Southeast to network and share resources to build viable farm businesses. Scholarship for BIPOC and limited resource farmers are available, as well as discounts for farm partners registering together. Absolutely love to see that. Registration opens in mid-November. Find out more at asapconnections.org. That's asapconnections.org. All right, back to the show. Well, Chris Bodnar, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So first, give us a little context. Tell us about your farm in particular, Close to Home Organics, where you're located, the size and the scale of the farm, and what enterprises you have going on.
Yeah, well, my wife, Paige, and I own and operate Close to Home Organics in Abbotsford, British Columbia. And from U.S. perspective, that's in the Pacific Northwest. We're just a few kilometers north of the border with Bellingham, just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia here. We focus on vegetable and some berry production. And so we're a certified organic farm. We've been doing this now for 15 years. Close to Home Organics has been in existence as an entity since 2012. And the scale we're operating on is about 7 acres of the vegetable and berry production. And we're part of a larger farm, which we'll talk about, I guess, Glen Valley Organic Farm. But so we're a portion of that entity as well. The produce that we're selling has the primary avenues are a community shared agriculture program. So we do that in collaboration with some other farms. We do a farmers market ourselves, and then we also sell collaboratively with a number of other farms to cover off a number of farmers markets. And we do some wholesale. And that's something we've gotten into a bit more in the past year. And we have an existing restaurant client, particularly a pie shop that has its roots in our farm. And so we continue to supply them with, in particular, blackberries and rhubarb.
I had missed the pie shop in my initial research. So we'll circle back to that. I definitely want to hear about that.
Yeah, sometimes I forget about it and I realize like, whoa, pie is pretty important. And it's such a stalwart of our long standing, the rhubarb was grown on the farm before we got here, and it continues to grow, and we take care of it, and we harvest and chop it and send it off, and it's almost like we do it in our sleep now. And it's important to recognize how crucial rhubarb is to our existence here.
Well, let's back up a second. You mentioned Glen Valley Organic Farm. What is the Glen Valley Organic Farm Cooperative, and how did that start?
Yeah, so the Glen Valley Organic Farm Cooperative started 22 years ago. So that's before I was farming, before I was part of this. And it came up as the cooperative came up as a way of securing the land at that point in time. So the previous owners were getting out of agriculture. They had bought the farm, they had converted it to organic status. They had developed the vegetable and a berry production. They did it while they were starting up a business, a juicing business, and they were changing their focus to that. But they saw the value of what the farm represented in terms of excellent soil. Like, we're on a floodplain, it's incredible soil, really beautiful spot, and they wanted it to remain in organic production. But I mean, for the most part, when you're selling a property, you don't get to determine what the buyers do with it. But they saw a larger vision for what it could be. And at that time in Vancouver, there was a lot of discussion going on around local food. And in some ways, the city was ahead of a lot of the other discussion that's come up since, as far as what does a local food economy look like. And they were able to get enough interest amongst some people on another farm, and a farm that's also cooperatively owned, as well as various community members who they had built relationships with, or some who were simply attracted to the interest of like, whoa, what is this about a farm that is available? And they got together and they decided that the way that they could raise enough capital to purchase the farm, like this new group of people that were interested in the property, was by forming a cooperative. And within our province, a cooperative can issue shares up to a value of $5,000 without triggering additional regulatory oversight from the Securities Commission. So they were able to start by incorporating as a cooperative, raising capital through the shares, and eventually were able to get a local credit union, Van City Credit Union, to mortgage the property. And that was a key part of securing the property and making it available to other farmers. And now what's unique about the model is that the goal of the cooperative is to hold and steward and protect the farmland and make it available to current and future generations to be able to grow food for the local community. And what that means is that over the past 22 years, the land around us has appreciated in value ridiculous amounts. Like the farm, when it was purchased by the co-op, was worth about $500,000, and comparable properties in our valley now are going for over $11 million. So it's just, we're at a point in our province where you cannot buy land and pay for it by farming. And that creates a huge challenge for what does agriculture look like in the future. And so in some ways, the co-op is a model of how do we take land off the speculative real estate market and make it available to people who want to farm. And as farmers, that's where we come in. And so we've been given the opportunity to farm on this land, and we are members of the cooperative, but we are also tenants of the cooperative. So we pay rent for our housing, we pay rent to use the land, and the opportunity is that it allows us to farm. The disadvantage that some people point out is that we're obviously not gaining equity in the property. Like, we don't own it. We're not going to sell it someday. We're not going to cash in on that investment. But what it has allowed us to do is to run a viable business and put our own, we're paying below market value for lease and housing. And that's allowed us to put money into our own savings and plan accordingly for our future. So there's a tremendous opportunity here, and in some ways it's an interesting experiment in terms of how do we own land that goes beyond simply individuals having to either figure out how to make a farm work to pay for it individually, or be independently wealthy to be able to own land and then farm on it for fun or for as a second career. So yeah, that within the context of Glen Valley Organic Farm Cooperative, 22 years in, it paid off its mortgage after 10 years. The last 12 years have largely gone towards infrastructure improvements on the farm, like new cooler, new freezer, replacing roofs on barns, upgrading housing, making sure that the spaces we have to live in are healthy and safe, and that we have quality accommodation for our seasonal workers on the farm. And yeah, and that's the core purpose of the co-op, is simply to own the land, to make sure that the assets are maintained and upgraded as necessary, and that the land is available to farmers to farm.
Wow, there's several different directions we can go there. So you talked about raising money from shareholders, correct?
That's right.
So what are you aware of what that process looked like?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question, because at that point in time, to go to any financial institution as a cooperative was a challenge. So I wasn't part of that process, but I've been the beneficiary of that process, because Van City Credit Union, I mean, it's a cooperative. Credit unions are financial cooperatives, so they're owned by their members. And so, in one sense, it should be a no-brainer. Like, hey, we're playing in the same ballpark as you. Like, isn't this something you want to do? But at that time, it was beyond their normal operations, because when you look at a cooperative and the number of people involved, and I guess sort of the black box from a lot of lenders' perspectives, it presents all they can think of is like the risk involved. It presents a significant amount of risk. And there was work to be done at that point. And so, the other detail within this that I didn't mention right off the bat is, in order to secure the land right off the bat, a few of the shareholders took out second mortgages on their homes. And that's originally how they secured the property while they were in negotiations with the credit union to make this work. But what it did was it really pushed the credit union to understand, like, if we want essentially like a social economy to exist, like social enterprises and co-ops are part of that, we need to think about other ways of evaluating risk. And so in some ways, a co-op in this context presents a lower risk because you have so many people with skin in the game. And that's partly what they wanted to see. Like, they're not going to give out a mortgage if no one is has anything at risk. And so the shareholder capital, $5,000 each, that's sizable enough that people don't want to lose that. And there are enough people together that they're going to make sure that this works. There's an aspect of, like, when we look at from a lending institution, the 5 C's of lending, like character, capital, they've got like the characters there. The people are known entities. There's collateral. There's land that if this fails, they've got the farm, and that can go back on the market. People have skin in the game. Like, there's collateral there, or there's capital there that they put up to make this work. And so what it really did was push Van City to think about how it was going to work in the realm of cooperatives and financing cooperatives. And I think, like, the parallel process that's happened over the last 22 years is Van City has really picked up the flag as a cooperative financial institution, and it has developed a whole suite of lending for cooperatives, both in agriculture but in the broader economy, which has seen all sorts of new businesses come about as a result of that. Everything from like bike couriers through to carpenters that use reclaimed wood to make fine furniture and home renovations. Like, it's this whole creative economy that is people starting businesses collaboratively working together. And so our farm, I mean, we take some pride in, like, we were part of thinking through how that can work, and what role can a financial institution, particularly a cooperative financial institution, play in supporting that.
Something that I can speak to, whenever we applied for the loan for our particular farm, one of the risk mitigation factors that played very well into our favor was we had actually established a 40-member year-round CSA. And we had those 40 members sign letters of support saying that this is how much we're going to contribute to this project. And so you scale that up to this cooperative model, and it seems like risk mitigation through overwhelming community support, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. And it was backed up. Like at that point, they had a business plan. They demonstrated how it was going to work, how they're going to pay it back. So it's like the one side, the co-op, and this is, I think, important on any realm, is that sometimes people think of co-ops as sort of a magic bullet or like a special, magical force that's somehow going to solve a problem. And in the end, it's a legal entity. So it's a legal structure, a way of structuring a business. And it has to be supported by sound business decision making and good governance in terms of a board, active engagement of members and support by members. And so it doesn't negate the necessity of any of that, but in one sense it does, like as you say, that community support, that community engagement, it can provide an additional layer of guarantee of stability to a project like this. And it's easier, like what it comes down to is all of these things are going to be easier when there's collateral involved. Like the land was huge as being able to secure a loan, but then it's what are you going to do with it? How is this going to be viable? And I think that's really has been the exciting part of it, is that it has supported the creation and the ongoing development of viable farm enterprises. And it brings up another thought that I think is important. We can go back in history and look at ways that co-ops in agricultural communities have been used in the same similar context. And I go back to my grandparents, who were on the Canadian prairies in their agricultural enterprise, and they were in communities at a time like in the 20s and 30s when banks didn't set up in small towns. Stores, like you were dependent on either someone moving in and opening a store that had enough capital and collateral to do that, or you were stuck really far away from anything as far as your groceries, your inputs, any of those sorts of things. And so they started co-ops. They started co-ops to supply to get their inputs from, their building infrastructure, their petroleum products, animal feed. They started credit unions, so they had a place to deposit their money so that they could lend to each other and have a process for doing that. But what they built into those organizations, and this is what I think is really neat, in the federated co-ops that supplied them with their food, with their inputs, all of these sorts of things, they built equity in that organization, but that equity was not paid out until they retired. So they recognized that the farms were not going to be viable if every new generation had to buy out the land and the infrastructure at the previous at an appreciation of that the previous generation needed in order to retire. And so what they did was they built the ability to build equity into other cooperative enterprises. And so they built these institutions like credit unions, like the federated co-op system, so that they would, over time, build equity based on how much patronage they did with that institution. And when they retired, that's when they could start to draw their equity out. And so it provided them with, in one sense, like part of a pension to support them to live off the farm later on once their kids came on to take over the farm. So it was a way of transferring the farming enterprise without having to liquidate all the assets and pass it on. And I think that was a really creative foresight they had, like when thinking through that, what that looked like. And I mean, I always look at my grandparents and I was like, wow, I actually never knew them as farmers. They retired at the age of 55. And they lived long retirements. They had, without having to sell off the farm to pay for it. And so I think that when we start to think collaboratively, it's not just like on a cooperatively owned land. It's what are the institutions that we build in our communities, and how do they support us to live comfortably and well into retirement and beyond farming.
Yeah, and that's a part of the conversation that I feel like I've stumbled into was how can we use these different models to relieve some or to solve some of the challenges on the farm right now, but then what are the implications 20 or 30 years from now? And I think that's something that, as a lot of us get interested in this, we don't think about, but there's a huge amount of potential for relieving a lot of the pressure later in our farming careers.
Yeah.
So how many farms are a part of that co-op? How many farms are farming at Glen Valley?
Okay, so we have two farm businesses on the farm right now. So Earth Apple Farm and Close to Home Organics. And so we farm side by side, like our fields are right next to each other. Our homes are just across a yard from each other. We share some equipment. We share some, like our cooler space and barn packing area. But we farm like independently, and that we make our own decisions about what crops we're going to grow and where we choose to sell for the most part. And then having said that, we also work the market cooperatively in some contexts as well. So, but yeah, right now the co-op itself houses the two businesses, and then these two businesses also collaborate with other farms in terms of our marketing and so on.
So in a sense, it's two vegetable farms on a shared piece of ground.
That's right.
It sounds like there's a strong co-marketing element between the two farms. But then even in terms of infrastructure, you mentioned cooler, things that come to my mind are maybe greenhouses or large pieces of infrastructure. Are those invested in by the individual businesses? Are those invested in by Glen Valley? And then my follow-up question is, what about small tools or supplies? I'm thinking, small pieces of equipment. Are those purchased by the individual operations, or is that something that Glen Valley as a whole has a hand in?
Yeah, so so small tools and inputs and everything, like those are the business's responsibility that we do individually. For the most part, it doesn't work to share things that you use on a daily basis that employees are going to be using that depreciate pretty quickly. And even like at points in time, the businesses have shared a tractor, and that was a huge boost in an ability like for each to scale up their operations at particular points in time without having to put out all the capital for that type of a purchase. But like as the business has scaled, and we also recognize like when we get a break in the weather, when it's not raining in the spring here, you need the tractor and you need it now to get that work done. And so that it creates a little bit of stress when you're like watching your clock and waiting for the other business to finish with the tractor. So it made sense at particular points in time as we scaled up that we would have our own equipment for the field. But where things like we bought a mulch layer a few years ago, and looking at that, like for the number of days that you use it in the year and the cost, like it saves a huge amount of labor in terms of our weeding and such. But it doesn't make sense for each business to own that. Like it would even be a piece of equipment that if a service existed around here to rent such a thing, that you would consider renting it. And outside of that, like, well, we can co-own it. Like that makes sense. So a lot of the implements for our tractors we co-own, but the tractors themselves we own separately. When it gets to fixed infrastructure on the farm, this is where, like as a co-op, we sit down on an annual basis and say, well, here's our budget. We put a certain amount of money aside for maintenance and capital, capital maintenance. So we need to replace the roofs on the barn regularly. So we need to make sure that we have money put aside for that. We need to make sure that we're doing upgrades on the houses so that they're in good shape, that people aren't all of a sudden having to move out because they were neglected for too long and now they're falling apart. Like we don't want that to happen. But also then we look at what are priorities that for investment that are going to benefit both of the businesses as well as potential future occupants of the farm. So when we looked at the cooler space and the freezer space, that's something like those are built into the barn. So it makes sense that the co-op owns those and then leases them back to the farmers. When we look at greenhouses, for example, we're using the largest greenhouse that we have is 36 by 95. Those are things that we own individually as businesses. And at the end of the day, when we're done farming, there's the possibility that if we need to take them apart and sell them off, we can do that. If there's another farm coming on that wants to buy out that infrastructure, that would be another way of doing that. And that is the way we have managed farmer succession in the past. So some fixed infrastructure when people are leaving is available for sale, and either the incoming farmer or an existing farm business on the farm has bought them out. So yeah, generally like the things that are specific to each business, the business is responsible for investing in or negotiating with the other business to decide if they want to buy that collaboratively. And then things that are part of permanent infrastructure. So when we think of like our wells on the farm, like for water supply, when we look at electrical upgrades, when we look at housing upgrades, those are things that all benefit the long-term viability of the co-op in terms of having quality assets to lease to farms. And so that falls within its mandate and its mission. So that just comes down to a practice of prioritizing and budgeting. As I said, like the lease rates are below market value, but the lease rates are still adequate, that they need to cover like everything from property taxes through to electrical bills through to maintenance of infrastructure. So we're not going to charge less than it costs to maintain the farm. It's just that there's no one else making a profit, like expecting to live off of the proceeds of the rental income. Everything that's generated is invested back in the operation of the farm.
A shorthand way to make sense of it is short-term, intermediate, and long-term assets. And the long-term assets are really the responsibility of the cooperative to invest in and maintain. And then it sounds like some intermediate and definitely your short-term assets are the responsibility of each individual farm first. Whether or not those farms want to go in together is up to them.
Yeah.
You were talking about, if a new farmer comes on or a farmer leaves the farm, having those intermediate and short-term assets to decide what to do with. What's the mechanism for a farmer who would be interested in joining Glen Valley Cooperative? And then also, conversely, what is the mechanism for leaving the cooperative?
Yeah, well, we could start with the leaving, because someone has to leave in order to make space for someone else to be able to come on. And so usually that involves a provision that we ask for a 1-year notice, that if someone was planning on leaving, that it gives that time to plan. And usually we haven't been in a situation where that's been unreasonable. Like it takes at least a year to plan that sort of a succession. Once the co-op knows that someone is planning on leaving, we've done in the past is created a committee to work with the farms, both the exiting farm and the remaining farm, as well as a couple of members of the co-op, to determine like what is it that the outgoing farmer wants to get out of this succession, like in terms of, do they have infrastructure that they would prefer to take with them, or do they have infrastructure that they would like to leave on the farm and have someone else pay for? Does it make sense the co-op would be interested in buying some of what they have? Like, so all of that is on the table. So that's sort of a facilitated process to figure out what does everyone want to get out of it in the end. And from that, the co-op then is able to develop a request for proposals that it can circulate in the agricultural community to see who would be interested in coming onto the farm. And so the last time we did this was about 6 years ago, when Earth Apple Farm came on, and we were able to say, like, with the outgoing farmer, this is what he wanted to see, because he was moving across the country, so he didn't want to take everything with him. And there were some things that were just easy enough, like the incoming farmer had a number of assets and so on, tools and so on, that she didn't need to buy everything from him. But there were things that were easy enough for him to post on local agricultural listservs and Craigslist and such, that people picked up fairly easily. Like there was planning that he had to do in terms of how to liquidate some of his assets and get what the best rate of return he could on that, in terms of knowing that he was going to have to buy a whole bunch of new stuff when he got to his new place on the East Coast. But also there were a number of things that were just easy enough for the incoming farmer to buy out, and some things that were basically put on the table. Like, if you're coming in, it's expected that you're going to be doing a similar enough type operation that, like, this is what the co-op needs to lease out, and that like you can't come in and say, well, I only need half of that. We're looking for a compatible business. And so that allowed enough interest in terms of people putting in an expression of interest or a proposal to the co-op, that the co-op was able to interview people, figure out where the best fit was, and select a farmer to come onto the farm. And yeah, so at that point, the obligation of the incoming farmer is to buy a share in the co-op. So that's a $5,000 investment that they'll get back when they leave. and whatever the financial arrangements are with the outgoing farmer, that's between them. It can be facilitated in part by the co-op to make sure that everyone is on good terms and that it's making sense. And then an arrangement with the existing business as to, is there a need for mentorship? Is there a need for collaboration, or how are we going to work together? So there's the financial side, and there's also the personality fit that we all wanted to make sure that we're going to be working and living alongside each other. Even if we're not working with each other directly day to day, we still all have to get along and be able to work through differences of opinion and so on. And so those are the soft side and the financial side, and the stuff, the tools and the land, those all have to sort of fit and click for it to work. And I think the more, what we found is the more we were able to articulate the opportunity that the co-op had and the expectations the co-op had, that sort of help people self-identify whether this was an opportunity that was even relevant for them. And then, so the people that we had inquiring were very well matched to the opportunity that was there. And then it was a matter of figuring out, okay, well, so what are the personalities? What are the needs of everyone involved, and how do we meet those? And coming with a resolution that works. And I mean, the track record is that we have a business that came on at that point 6 years ago and plans to be here for a long time. And our business close to home, we've been here living on the farm for 15 years. We definitely see the opportunity that's here and are committed to working to make the co-op a viable place. And so that's really the mix of what we need in terms of people willing to put in the effort. Understand it's not always easy, but at the end of the day, we have a really amazing opportunity to farm here.
Throughout that process, you kept using the word co-op as a reference to a body of, I'm assuming, individuals. On your website, you had mentioned a board of stewards providing leadership and decision-making. Are they a part of that process? Are normal shareholders a part of that process? Or I'm assuming you're a part of that process as well. What is the makeup of the co-op that makes those decisions?
Yeah, so generally so the co-op has a board, and so we call it a board of directors. We use the term board of stewards because, being really a director of an organization, they're there to steward that organization. And we use the term steward. We're stewarding the land. We're stewarding the community. And but yeah, they have the legal responsibilities as directors of the organization. And so usually they'll see that there's a committee of members to take on a particular task. And so if we're doing an infrastructure project, they would make sure that we have a committee together to oversee that process. The way we operate on a day-to-day basis is that we have a group called our Farm Circle, and so that includes the resident farmers, the leaseholders on the farm, and a number of co-op members who are there to support them and support the co-op in terms of its operations and decision-making process. I think it's important to point out that a lot of this evolved, in particular, this group that we call the Farm Circle. It evolved out of a really rough time in our history. About 10 years ago, we went through a process of maturing as an organization. The drive that brought a lot of people to the co-op originally, the idea of save the farm or protect the farmland, was, in one sense, it was inspiring. It was motivational, but it was also idealistic. And there were challenges on the farm at that point that between individuals that were living on the farm and expectations of co-op members, that the co-op members, they made decisions, but without really thinking through who was going to carry out those decisions. And there was defensiveness, I think, amongst the people on the farm who felt vulnerable. They weren't clear as to what point, is the co-op giving us direction and so on. And I remember a meeting where we had gone through a process of mediation and resolving a larger issue on the farm. And one of the shareholders said, we can't expect the farmers on the farm to be living out a dream that we have. We can't live vicariously through the farmers. If we're gonna make this work, there's a realistic expectation that we're involved on a practical basis and that our expectations are reasonable. And that aspect of what's reasonable has really defined how we see good governance in the organization. So even if the only thing that's accomplished in a year by the co-op as an entity is to continue owning the land, to maintain the infrastructure, and to ensure that the leases are updated, that's all it needs to do. We originally there were people who joined who said, "Oh, and we should be doing education and outreach and tours and et cetera." But who's going to do that? Like, if you're operating a farm business and you have a young family or any of these other things, like you can't put that off on someone else to carry out. And that's really where we had to define, like, what is the co-op? The co-op is a group of people who think it's important to protect the farmland. And how do we protect the farmland? We protect it by owning it and leasing it to people who are going to farm. And if that happens, the mission is accomplished. That's great. The reality is, how do we make that work? Well, there are people who live near or some a little bit further away from the farm. Been easier to do in a year of COVID because everything has gone to Zoom where we used to meet in person. But we have a meeting every 3 weeks or so where we're able to sit down and say, like, so what are issues? Like, what's come up? Oh, there's a leak. Okay, well, we have to make sure that we have that covered in the budget. And so it's really that farm circle is a working group that reports back to the stewards, so our board, to make sure that the financials are updated, that we have the working budget. It reflects the needs on the farm at any given point in time, that any issues are highlighted and brought back, that if there's interpersonal conflict that is coming about, that there can be support, like to make sure that we have either a way of talking that through or a mediator or someone to help support that work. And I mean, like, here's, this is often when I'm talking about this where people are saying, whoa, this is where it gets really complicated. Co-op is way too much. Like, I couldn't handle that. But the reality is, a lot of people in a family farm situation, they deal with this in a much more complicated format. Like, if you're born into a family, you don't get to choose who your business partners are. Like, you don't, like, you can be in a situation like where one member of the family bullies another, and you can't get out of it without leaving farming or that farm altogether. So it's not necessarily easier. I think that in a family farm context, it's the thing about the co-op is it forces you to put it on the table. Like, conflict is normal. Conflict is something that happens in whether it's in a marriage, whether it's in a friendship, whether it's in a business relationship. And the real standard, like, that we need to evaluate that by is, how well do you work through that conflict, and how do you build out of it to come up with resolutions that work for people. And the co-op forces you to do that, because anyone at any point in time can walk away, say, like, I'm not married to this, like, I don't have to be here. But we all see the opportunity that's there. And so this is it's a long answer to your question, like, what the co-op, what is it, and what is the mechanism of governance? We have people who really value the role that the farm plays in the community, that the farm plays in their own lives and food supply, and they're willing to support in a volunteer capacity the functioning of the farm. We mentioned the businesses, and like, so what do other people get out of it? I should point out, like, we have one co-op member. She's 85 years old. She comes out to the farm and she gardens every weekend throughout the summer. Like, just an amazing powerhouse of energy, and keeps us all in line. When an 85-year-old comes out and says, hey, this looks like a mess, we need to clean it up, everyone
you clean it up.
I mean, yeah, and she's right. And it's just that, getting those outside eyes. We have another set of shareholders who keep beehives on the farm, and so that's their connection to the place. Like, for some people that live in the city, it's just amazing to drive for 45 minutes and get to a place that feels really far away, that you're supporting something that has a role in the larger community and food economy. So yeah, we have the co-op is like 45 shareholders approximately. Some of them are really involved. Some of them have been involved. Some of them are there because they like what the co-op does, but they don't have the ability to be involved right now. But their money is still capitalizing the farm. It's made a contribution, and it continues to do so. And then we have a core group of people who are the volunteers, who are the board members, who support the Farm Circle group to continue meeting and operating. And it really is a community effort. But yeah, when you talk about like community shared agriculture, like this is community. This brings like people are committed in a way. And at that point, like they put in their $5,000, but they haven't even signed up for a CSA share yet. It's just they get the whole community and the agriculture without getting the food yet. That's a whole other entity unto itself. So.
Now, I don't know about you, but I got into farming to grow food, not spend time creating pack lists, writing newsletters, responding to emails, maintaining web stores. Look, if I could spend less time on my phone and my computer and more time actually farming, that would be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for CSA farmers. It takes care of all the admin, managing orders, customer communications, automating tedious tasks so that you can get back to doing what you love, right? On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers about 6 hours a week. That's 6 hours you could, spend time with your family, get back out into the field, or just take a breather. So what would you do with those extra 6 hours? Now is the time to get your systems ready for next season. Learn how Farmhand can help at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. Link is in the show notes. This episode is also brought to you by High Mowing Organic Seeds. It is seed browsing season, and High Mowing Organic Seeds is releasing 66, not 65, not 67, 66 new seed varieties for 2025 on November 1st. These beautiful and productive vegetable, flower, and herb varieties are 100% organic and non-GMO and trialed for optimal performance in organic growing systems. Now, I don't know about you. I follow NOP guidelines and order organic seeds, partially because I have to, but it's very easy to look through their catalog and know that everything is clear and safe for me to order. Just a side note, whether you're trying to bring the best to your CSA, wholesale customers, or the farmer's market, High Mowing has the professional quality seeds and supportive grower reps to get you from seed to harvest. Visit highmowingorganicseeds.com to request a catalog. Use code NOTIL25, that's NOTILL25 for 10% off of your order of $100 or more. Again, visit highmowingseeds.com. All right, let's get back to the show. I mean, something that you brought up was it does seem from the outside when you have owned your own farm business that any level of collaboration or cooperation seems complicated. And it is. But at the same time, it's how many times have you encountered situations where a cooperative approach may be complicated, but the way that you're traditionally encountering the problem maybe seems more impossible?
Like, I think that what you underscore there is one of the risks that I think that we have in the conceptualization of the local food movement, in that we've really fetishized like the independent farmer, and this idea, like on one end, sort of a libertarian ideal, or like these are not they're not mutually exclusive categories. And I think that the thing that we ultimately have to recognize is that as humans, we work together, we collaborate, we cooperate. That's not always the story we tell to ourselves, but that is the reality. And so, like even like how challenging it can be if everything rests on you. Like you're the decision maker, you're the doer, you're the financer, you have to put it all together. That's a huge burden for one person to carry. And even if that is your experience on the farm, I'm pretty sure you still rely on other people, like friends, family. Like there's no one that exists as a solitary entity with no community support or community contact. And I think that is important to acknowledge, like that we're social beings and we rely on each other. And as humans, we're messy sometimes. And that's part of what makes it great. Like, so I think that there is something to say that these relationships are worth building.
What if, in maybe an infrastructure decision or maybe even bringing on a new farm, what if there's not a consensus within that committee or within the board of directors? How are those decisions addressed from that point of non-consensus?
Yeah, so we have come to this point before where we do work on a consensus basis, and usually that's not a problem. But we have also had a position where we needed a board who is going to take decisive action, like make a decision and move that forward, and recognize that maybe not everyone was going to be happy with that. So we do have a point at which the board of stewards, our directors, have the ultimate ability to make a decision and move that forward for the organization. But that's something that it's happened a couple of times, but for the most part that like we have a process in our bylaws as to how we handle conflict, and so that we all have the right to mediation. That if there is an issue, we can bring in an outside person. Which, in the most, I mean, one example, we've brought in a mediator, like someone who has no background in our farm or something, but to work through a process. But we've also understood where we've had conflict in the past, and we've brought in an outside facilitator to work us through. So when we brought on a new farmer 6 years ago, we hired a facilitator to work through that process, just like a lot of farms would hire a succession planner or someone to help them work through intergenerational succession. We brought in a facilitator to help us work through that process. And so we have a number of tools in our toolbox as far as how do we recognize sensitive areas and how do we work through. And that sometimes that means putting like a budget line to make sure that we can hire a mediator to get through a process. Because that's ultimately, at the end of that process, you can still have someone who's not happy with the outcome, but has made the decision to walk away from it. Or like I've been in situations where I haven't necessarily been happy with the outcome, but I recognize that maybe I'm just being grumpy here, and I need to put that aside. And also, I don't have the energy and I don't have the time to put in something else. And so I'm happy to, if others are willing to pick that up, then go with it. Yeah. There's a little bit of self-awareness and self-work that has to happen in this, because there are times when I can feel very passionately about something myself and recognize, maybe I'm the only one, or maybe like, what am I obstructing? And those are important things to be able to be aware of as well. So,
I mean, even in interpersonal relationships, that's something that we all need to work on. And especially with decision making, it is not always that my decision was made. It is important that a decision is made than not made.
Oh, and we can look at any number of examples that are outside of a cooperative, but like in a business partnership, where people, rather than working out the details of a partnership agreement in advance, they decide, well, we would never have to deal with that, or we don't really want to talk about that. And the inevitable happens where they get to that point and they haven't figured out how to address that. And so they have significant conflicts because they didn't decide in advance how they were going to deal with that point. And so, these are all the points of like the human aspect, and understanding that clarity is really important in any kind of relationship and business agreement, to understand that what have you agreed to and what have you not agreed to, because just ignoring something is not going to cause it to go away or to magically take care of itself.
For people that are interested in exploring setting up a cooperative like this, do you have any particular advice or any really salient lessons learned from your time working with Glen Valley?
Yeah, hire a co-op developer. There are people who specialize in setting up co-ops, and they walk you through an entire process. Because the big thing is, a lot of times people get really excited and they're picking out a logo and a name and everything, but they have no shared objectives. And that's like, really, what is a co-op? A co-op is a self-help organization. So you look at agricultural communities where co-ops have been used, it's because there's been a gap in the market. So credit unions arose because banks weren't present. There was no one providing financial services. So the purpose of the credit union was to provide that financial stability where people could deposit their money and people could borrow. Likewise with a farm co-op, like identifying what is the need that organization is going to fill. Like, are you doing a co-op just because you heard about someone else doing it and you think that sounds like a neat idea? Or is it actually a solution, like a tool to addressing a need that the members have? And so hiring a co-op developer is crucial to that process, because that's someone who's objective in it. They can tell you, hey, this isn't quite aligning right now. Like I'm not seeing the common purpose. or maybe you should consider some other options here. But also getting into like, so what happens? Like, what is the exit strategy? How do you build in, like, if someone needs to leave? And despite the best intentions and people wanting to stay on, people will have to leave. People will have to cash in their shares. So what does that look like? What is the longer term function of the organization as you go through? So what is the conflict resolution mechanism built in? And those are all things that are usually included in the bylaws of the organization up front. So what is the governance? What is the what is the dissolution strategy? Like what and what are the needs that are being met? All of that, having that defined up front and is crucial. And if you haven't done it before, and even if you have done it before, like getting someone this is their expertise. And so a lot of people wouldn't incorporate a business without hiring a lawyer to walk them through that process. Likewise, like you're not going to find a lot of lawyers with co-op experience, but there are co-op developers who have extensive experience and training in how to work through this. So I think that's key. I think the other thing is, and this is not just for co-ops, it's for any farm, but budget for working on yourself, budget for working on your relationships. So sometimes that might mean like having a facilitator. That might mean having a counselor working through disagreements. Like individually, it might mean having a therapist, like someone that you can talk to who's off the farm. But those are all really valuable tools for working on yourself and your relationships, and understanding that sometimes to get the best outcome, you need to put money into that. And it's tough for a lot of people. Like you have no problem saying, like giving the evaluation on like, if we buy that tractor, this is what it's going to provide us, like the financial return. Sometimes it's harder to see in terms of hiring a facilitator to walk you through a process. But we see so many examples where really promising or really good businesses fail because of conflict. And that's really sad. And I think that in the benefit in a co-op is that can be easier because you are choosing to be part of it. You're not born into it. You're not like, it's not a predetermined outcome. So you're part of it. You're choosing to be there, and you've got to put that work into it.
That's something that, because it's hard to quantify on paper, it's easily overlooked, especially in a business where sometimes margins can be pretty thin.
Yep. Well, and put another lens on it. Like how many marriages fail because of conflict about finance? Mm-hmm. Like we don't look at what our values are around money, and as a society, and I'm thinking more like in Canada, and I don't know how to compare this to the States, but like we don't talk about how much we earn when we get together with friends or around the family dinner table. Money can be a really bit obscure thing to people, and we don't recognize like most of what we learn about money in life comes from our parents. So you put on that lens of a marriage, and how many people find that what they thought was a really promising marriage falls apart because of disagreement, and it comes back to money and really conflicting values about how money is managed and how money is used. And so you then translate that into a business relationship or like in an organization, and wow, it's amplified even more. Mm-hmm. So these are big things.
One of the things that you mentioned before we got on the phone here was touring agricultural co-ops in Italy. What was that like, and what did you take away from that experience?
Yeah, well, so that was in 2017. And so going back to Van City, the credit union that originally mortgaged the farm, they now run, it stopped because of the pandemic, but they've been running for some 18 years now, a tour of the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, where they take a whole set of their staff to go and learn about co-ops. And the reason for that is that the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, they have a massive cooperative sector. They have a huge agricultural sector, but the point of Van City's tour is this area has a huge cooperative sector that generates something close to 20% of their GDP. And like, if you think that's significant. And this is the same region of Italy that hosts like Ferrari, Maserati, Ducati, as well as all sorts of high-end products. But like if you're eating Parmesan cheese or balsamic vinegar, or prosciutto, ham. Those are all coming from this region. So they have like really high-end niche market products that are in demand globally. And 20% of that GDP is generated by co-ops. So they send over a group of staff every year to learn about what is going on here. And so the University of Bologna's Faculty of Economics provides lectures to staff, and every year they choose a theme. And in 2017, they chose agriculture as a theme. So a group of food and farmer individuals from organizations that work with, or the events that he works with, were invited to go along. I got to go on that tour. And what we saw was, like, when people think of like Italian wine, they have this image from a movie, like of someone on their farm stomping on grapes and so on. But the reality when we're there is that the wine coming out of this region is produced by cooperatives. And so you have like hundreds of farms that are members of a wine co-op. And so the farmers themselves, they're not grape growers, they're wine producers. So they're growing those grapes specifically for this type of wine. So in that region, it's Lambrusco. It's a bubbly red wine, and that's sold around the world. And the really neat thing about the co-ops there is the co-ops actually, like, they represent cooperation amongst farmers, but there's also competition, because farmers have a choice as to which co-op they're going to be part of, because it's such a fundamental part of the way they've organized their agricultural system. So you have like grape growers who are actually wine producers. You don't have the like pork producers. You have prosciutto producers. You don't have dairy producers so much as you have Parmesan producers. And by working together, farms there have been able to achieve economies of scale to supply these high-end products to a global market, which in turn supports a number of different scales of farmers. So you have some farms that are like 10 acres, some farms that are 50 acres, but in general, you don't have really large-scale farms in that region. And the other thing that's come out of this area is like a lot of machinery that you can buy is produced in that region. Like they've developed technical expertise that supports that. So it's this really inspiring opportunity to go and see an agricultural sector that thrives on its cooperative model, and that it's scaled to an economy that operates within a global competitive marketplace. And so a lot of things that people like often will say as a critique of co-ops, oh, well, they're not scalable, or, oh, they won't work within this context. I mean, they prove it wrong. They prove those assumptions wrong, and that they show that it really comes down to like a process of identifying your marketplace, identifying your product, understanding like how like any one farmer on their own is not going to be able to produce quality cheese on a global, like to be able to supply a global market individually. So by working together, they're able to achieve that quality control, the quality assurance, the productivity, like the supply volume and the supply chain to their buyers. And that was just this moment of like, whoa, what we've been doing here is not some sort of like rinky-dink backyard irrelevant function. And to be there alongside a credit union and all these staff, and they're like looking at the financial side and saying, oh, well, what if we came up with a product that offered financing in this way? And what if we worked with farmers in that way? And what if we encouraged this sort of collaboration? It was like, whoa, you've got like 20 really bright minds all looking at the financial side of it and asking farmers like, hey, what do you think of this? Does that work? Or who would you take that back to get ideas from? And so it was just this really great moment of being inspired and wanting and recognizing that, well, we can do that here. It doesn't have to be on a grand scale. It doesn't have to be on a global scale, but yeah, we work together every day, and that's how we thrive. And that's really driven me the last 4 years in terms of thinking through, like, what can we do with our cooperative economies back at home and supporting ourselves and supporting each other.
So you said that there weren't a lot of large scale farms within those models in Italy. Is that because the small and medium scale farms were able to access the economies of scale without having to be at a large productive scale?
Well, so you can look at it as, say, like the objective of the co-op is to achieve the best price back to the farmer. And the way they do that is by creating a really high quality product that people are willing to pay for in a global marketplace. And so a farmer does not have to make that level of investment in like market development, in technology and so on individually. They're part of a group of, say, 500 farms who do that together.
So it's just as much of a co-marketing as it is anything else.
Well, that's what the co-op does for them. And so if they were to try to like just grow their grapes and sell them on an open market, like the objective of a buyer on the open market is to pay the lowest price for that input. And so when you have their buyer is the co-op, and the co-op is looking to get the best return for them, that's a huge support back to them. Now, in turn, like the co-op also provides agronomy services to their members to make sure, because they can't take delivery of substandard quality product. So they need their farm members producing the best quality product possible. So part of that membership, it pays for, like, say, a collective buy of agronomy services for the members, so that they're all producing the top quality product that's necessary to produce those really high-end value-added food products. And so that feeds the success of the individual farm members, that they're getting the best price possible, as opposed to having to compete for some of the bottom price on an open market. So they control, like in one sense, they're vertically integrated. They control that whole system of, like, some of the co-ops even, like, they buy their inputs together, so they're getting the best prices on those inputs. They're getting the best advice from the agronomists, and they're then getting the best price for their product. Because it's like, when you think of a lot of U.S. growers and Canadian growers, we're selling product to a buyer, and we don't ever have to think about it again. But in a bad year, like where you're really pushed, that's when you feel the most alone, like independently. Whereas in this model, people have not been forced to scale up to the same degree, because, like, in terms of the number of acres that they have under their management, because they are getting a better price for their product, and they're getting more support from their buyer. Now, that's not to say they aren't dealing, like, I don't want to romanticize what's going on there. They're still dealing with the realities of, like, a global marketplace and that global competition. They still have to innovate. They still have to diversify their crop base. But the opportunity that's in front of them, like when we were there, their agricultural colleges are full, like, in enrollment. There are people that look at agriculture as an opportunity, and you have, like, it's a sector that attracts the best in terms of their science and in terms of their research and development, and so that's encouraging.
And then you say that you brought some of that experience home. How has that changed what you're doing here? What has that motivated you to do, either at Glen Valley or just in the cooperative community?
The biggest thing for us was that we were standing next to an organic farmer that has to drive like 7 hours to get to the market. We're there Saturdays selling at the farmer's market side by side, and saying, like, at a certain point, this isn't really worth it. And we was talking to this other grower and, like, breaking down their cost of production and their cost of marketing. And they came to the realization that, like, it was costing them $500 just to drive over the mountain pass, like the 7-hour drive to get to market. And so when you calculated how much they actually had to sell at the market on a weekend to make it worth that drive, they're like, this is a little bit crazy. And so we're standing next to each other. We're both putting in those hours. We're paying 2 stall fees. Like, well, geez, why don't we look at a way to collaborate together? And so one of the things that our farmers markets in this area have been really good at encouraging is for the collaboration between farms. And what that's allowed us to do is that rather than each of us, like, say, covering one market, standing side by side, we're then able to cover 2 markets in the same day, that we send some product with them and they send some of their product with us, and that we're able to sell on behalf of both farms. And by working in a collaborative setting, we've been able to structure it in a way so that, like, we're not resellers. We're not going out and buying wholesale, or we're buying in a way that obscures who's producing the food. Our farm names are on the stand. Our farm names are on the price tags. We both have, like, we share in the success of a good day. We share in the rottenness of a bad day. If it rains, like, we get paid for the product that is sold from each of our farms on a market day. And so in that, just by doing that, has allowed us to cover more markets. So the benefit to the consumer is they have more selection at each individual stand at the different farmers markets. The benefit to us as farmers is we're able to sell at more markets without having to replicate, like, multiple stands and multiple individuals representing that many hours of labor at each farmers market. So we're able to cover more territory, generate more sales, and give a better selection to the customers. We've also then applied that model to our community shared agriculture program. And so we're, like, on our farm, our 2 businesses, Earth Apple and Close to Home, we were each running a CSA program. We're like, why aren't we doing this together? Like, why are we doing separate marketing? Why are we hiring separate staff? Why don't we do this together? So we did that. And then we started buying from, like, with the same farm that we do the markets for the fruit option. And so now our customers are like, oh, wow, we can get fruit from another region of the province because we can't grow fruit on the coast here with our climate. So we're offering a better option to our customers. We're moving more product for all the farms involved. And now this year we're bringing in 2 new farms to that CSA model. And so it's the whole idea of, like, well, we can do a CSA really well. And the more farms we have participating, the more volume we can do to more customers, and it produces, like, a better outcome for everyone. We have happy customers. We have farms who are able to really focus on where do they create value for their customers. It's through growing really good food. So we don't all 5 farms, we don't need to replicate the same marketing activities if we can work together to do that really well as one entity. So that look, like, it's not, so we didn't come back from Italy and saying, well, we've got to figure out how to be a global player in carrot production. We came back and said, wow, how can we work together with other farms and build something that saves us all time and makes us more money? And at the end of the day, like, no one wants to work harder for less money. Like, we want to be able to spend time with our families. We want to be able to do things we enjoy outside of farming. And if the cooperative provides us with that economic ability so that we're not burning ourselves out and each farm replicating the same mode of marketing, like, then why would we not do it? So it's been just really eye-opening. That doesn't mean we agree on everything. It doesn't mean we always, like, that everything is easy. But at the end of the day, like, what is the point of this? It's not that we're doing this so we can all be best friends. We're doing it so we can all sell a lot of product and access a larger marketplace. And at the end of the day, that works. It's great.
And have time at the end of the day.
Well, that's the thing. Like, we're looking at, like, I get, there are some people maybe who thrive off of spending all their time farming, but, like, I've got 3 kids, and I don't want them to grow up and resent farming because it means that we've had to give every ounce of our energy to the farm enterprise and have nothing left for our family. And I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. Like, working cooperatively has allowed us that flexibility to, I can say that from the times that I've worked cooperatively compared to the times when I've tried to do things independently, I've never been able to generate the profit level that I have as when we're working cooperatively. Like, the co-op has provided an economic return, like the cooperative model in working collaboratively with other farmers. That's its benefit at the end of the day. Like, yeah, we work together. There are great things. Some days sunshine and lollipops, and other days mud and mosquitoes. But at the end of the day, it makes us more money. And by making more money, we're able to do things that we want to do with our family, for our hobbies. It gives us a quality of life and a stability that that we really appreciate as farmers.
And so, especially recently, that's really been hitting home with me is just time at the end of the day. And part of having time at the end of the day is affording that time at the end of the day and not having to work 12 hours a day just to make sure that we're keeping the farm paid. So I'm very glad that you brought that up.
You can't make up for like 8 months of burnout in 4 months of like hibernation over the winter, like if that's your schedule. And likewise, you can't make up for the time you didn't spend with your kids when they were young by somehow thinking it's going to happen later on. They develop other interests. And I mean, just the ability to, at the end of the day, when our kids get off the bus from school today, I know that like my middle child, we're going to go for a run. My youngest child, my wife is going to go and do horse chores with her up at the neighbor's horse barn. But we know like 3:30, we're changing gears. And yeah, there's still things that have got to get done at the end of the day. And there's still things that we'll have to go back and finish up. But that doesn't create a level of stress in that, am I going to be able to, can I do that? And do I want to set up that expectation, that disappointment by saying, oh, I would really like to be able to go for that run with you, but I got to finish that up. No, like it's a non-negotiable. But we've got to build that into the way we structure our businesses and the way we farm. And I don't think that that's an unreasonable expectation.
And you also teach about the business aspects of sustainable agriculture. And it's interesting to me that somebody teaches about the business of sustainable agriculture is a part of not just one, but collaboration on many different levels and in several different models.
Well, so when this sustainable agriculture program started about 8 years ago, our local Glen Polytechnic University, the faculty member who was brought in to develop the program came to me and said, "Hey, are you interested in developing the course for this?" And I was like, "Oh, it sounds interesting. Why are you asking me?" He's like, "Well, you keep books, like you've got your financials down for your business. You know what's going on." And like, "Well, are you sure?" And he's like, "Well, no, I think you can do this." And I was like, when I sat down and thought, and I talked to other farmers, like, what do you wish you would have learned about business before you started? It came down to things like setting goals, knowing how to set goals, and goals that are inspiring, goals that make you want to get up in the morning, get out of bed and do something. And there are many different things that motivate people. There are, like, I've been around agriculture long enough now to know that what motivates my neighbor across the road might be completely different from what motivates me, but we get the same job done in a day. And we spend our time outside of farming differently, perhaps, but we can share that appreciation for wanting to have a quality of life. So how do you teach sustainable agriculture? Like, if you're teaching people regenerative farming practices, you're teaching them like diversified crop production, how do you do that and say, oh, and by the way, here's this traditional economic model, you've got to make that fit? Because it doesn't work. And that's where, when we look at co-ops, where did they originate from? They originated from people saying, what do we need to do together to be able to make our lives better? And once they could identify those common needs, then they could identify ways of addressing those needs. And that's really what I want to cultivate within our agricultural sector. So it's not about going and saying, well, someone should do this, or the government should do this, or the business should do this. So, like, what do we need, and how do we do that? And then if you have an articulated request, or say this is where we could really use some support or some development, you can determine, like, is that a policy request that you can take to your regional government, to your state or provincial government, or to your federal government? Is it something that we can do on our own? Do we have a business proposition that we could take to a lending institution that they would be willing to finance it? I think that what we see this challenge of, like, people feel in some regards like powerless, and that we can't send people on a path and say sustainable agriculture is important without thinking of the business side of it. And so what are the economic models? What are the business models that work And that's where, like, I think when I came back from Italy and I was like, whoa, I saw something that really works well. And what pieces of that can we take? And so that's really, it's not that I walked into a pre-existing program and had to make it fit what I was doing. It's like, so if we start from the beginning and say, what does sustainable agriculture look like? How do we develop a business class around that? And I was like, whoa, are you serious? You're letting me do this? And everyone's like, well, yeah, that's what we need. I was like, are you sure? Okay, I'm going to do this. And they're like, yeah, go ahead. And I keep on looking over my shoulder. It's like, is this okay? But I mean, that's the exciting thing. And I now see, like, my students are out, they're farming, they're working for other farms, they're starting their own farms. They're doing so, like, with business plans that make sense, that are carrying them into new businesses. They know what they're getting into, and that's exciting. I think that fetishization of, like, a lot of people say, well, I dream of having my own market stall and so on and everything, but they're basing that dream off what someone else is doing, as opposed to saying, like, what do I need? Like, what are my goals? What do I want to do? And how can I do that? And I may not have the same personal goals as the person down the street from me, but we may have the same business goals, like economic goals, that we want to sell this product. And if that simply means we're sharing a truck to do deliveries into the city, that saves us both a day of delivery time. That's amazing. That's a win. So it doesn't have, like, collaboration and cooperation. It doesn't have to be a big, massive project. It can simply be saying, hey, where can we share the cost of this, and then share the outcome? That's worth doing. That's worth putting some effort into. And I think those are the stories that we need to tell ourselves. Like, we spend a lot of time as a society talking about competition as though that's the only natural outcome of our human activity. But, like, we see everywhere from very liberal to very conservative communities, they still depend on cooperation. They depend on people working together. And we need to tell ourselves that story. Like, when we cooperate, we can do amazing things. I don't think that's a big stretch. I think that's just part of recognizing, oh yeah, we already do that. Let's focus on where we can do it a bit more. And the reality, like, when you look at the farming community, look at the sharing that goes on. Look at the Facebook groups. Look at the information that flows. Look at what people are willing to freely give of their experience and their knowledge and their time. It's pretty amazing.
I want to circle back to this pie shop. So tell us about this pie shop, because that's something that I don't think we think of when we think of farmers collaborating together. So how does that work?
So it actually came about. There was someone who was involved in our co-op at its early stages, who was looking at that question of how do you do a value-added product that supports local farms. And he made really good pies, and ended up developing an idea around a restaurant that started just as a pie shop in Vancouver, in an area that was traditionally sort of like it was the 1960s sort of hippie area of the city, which is now completely remade into like a pretty high-end real estate market. Well, extremely high-end real estate market. But he got in at a point in time when the neighborhood was pretty eclectic, and he started selling pies. And he'd drive all over the province sourcing fruit from different farms, and he'd bring it back to the farm. He'd throw it in the freezer and come out every week and take some fruit out of the freezer and so on. And did this for a number of years. He since passed away. His daughter took over the pie shop. So it's Aphrodite's Organic Cafe and Pie Shop in Vancouver. In Kitsilano is the neighborhood. And Peggy has developed that into a full restaurant. The pie shop is on one corner, and kitty corner from that is the restaurant. So they have two corners of this intersection where they operate. And yeah, they buy like 150 to 200 pounds of rhubarb from us, more like pre-pandemic, a weekly basis, a little bit less now as the restaurants are operating at a different capacity. They buy blackberries from us. We're working on figuring out this season how to supply them with more carrots and beets and such going forward. But this idea of community supported or community shared agriculture was really Aphrodite's came out of this idea of a restaurant-supported agriculture, where what if a restaurant and a farm work together, and the restaurant really worked to sell the farm as part of its identity, and that's been big. They've done this over like 18 years now, and it hasn't been easy, because you have a lot of restaurants who put like local organic on their menu, and they're buying from the big wholesalers. Like, there's no way of verifying that. So when you actually do it and you have to put a price tag on your menu that reflects that, it's gutsy, but they do it, and they have clientele who love their product. We love supplying to them. I mean, I don't do a lot of restaurant sales. It's not part of what our business is set up to, but I love working with Aphrodite's, even if it's just to send the rhubarb. And like, yeah, we grow a lot of rhubarb. Like, there's a lot of rhubarb that goes out the door specifically for the pie shop, as well as a wholesale client that we sell to by the case in season. I mean, in the larger sense, when I think of what my dream of being a farmer was and what that market stall would look like, I didn't really think about rhubarb. But when I think about our profit centers on the farm, like, yeah, rhubarb's pretty admirable crop. And we grow a lot of it. We sell a lot of it. We make a lot of pie. And at the end of the day, that's a pretty sweet outcome to get to work with.
Yeah, I mean, I asked that question in fun, but that's really a beautiful intergenerational story there.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like, I can see definitely in communities where there was a fear of like a lack of opportunity and so on. And that, I mean, my great grandparents came to Canada because they saw the opportunity. But I have one set of one grandfather who sold the farm when everyone was in town one day to make sure that no one in his family ever had to farm again. And I have on the other side of my family, grandparents who saw opportunity in farming, but there was never an expectation that anyone in the family would have to do it. And I think that that's the thing. Like, if farming is essential, we need to grow food, but it also can't be a family ideology that people are forced into doing it, or that there's an expectation. And the more we talk about it, the more we think of alternative ways of structuring it to say, hey, yeah, maybe my kids aren't going to be doing this. I sort of open the world to them, say, hey, there's lots of opportunity for you. You choose which path you're going to do, and we'll support you in doing that. But also, yeah, the work that we put into this farm, we're confident that it's going to be an opportunity for someone else coming along at some point. And that's pretty amazing. Like, I mean, what people have given us who didn't know us walking into it is a pretty amazing gift that we would be able to, I mean, going back to what we call our directors, that we would be able to steward that and make it available to others going forward is a neat opportunity.